Continue with the scripture reading. Who's got that this morning? Anybody? Oh, Tana is going to read it this morning. We are continuing our journey through the Bible, and last week we checked in on the Israelites as they had just escaped slavery in Egypt, and God led them through the Red Sea out into the wilderness to wander around for quite a while. We pick up the story about 40, 50 days later when Moses will meet God on Mount Sinai, and God will give him something very familiar to us, the Ten Commandments. And so that's what we got this morning. Thank you, Tana.
Today's reading is from Exodus chapter 19, verses 3 through 7, and then chapter 20, 1 through 17. Then Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites." So Moses came, summoned the elders of the people, and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. Then God spoke all these words. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of their parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox, or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. I just love when the puppet show makes the sermon redundant, because Karen just sort of knows how to preach sermons, so that's great. I want to start with failures this morning. I've experienced a few of those in my life. Any of you experienced a few of those in your life? A couple. Failures usually have something called consequences. And I've also had a few of those in my life. Like if you fail a test in school, right? Anybody ever done that before? Raise your hand. I want to see loud and proud. Yes! Bruce is like, yeah, that was good. I failed a few tests, and what happens when you fail a test? Your grade goes down. Maybe it even shows up on your report card, and maybe you even have to talk to your parents about it. Not speaking from experience or anything. I've failed a couple other kinds of tests too. There's a test that I fail on a regular basis. Every year I go to the eye doctor and they give me this little book with the numbers on it in the colors. Have you ever taken this test? I fail it every time because I'm colorblind. And there's a consequence for that, and that consequence is that I never, ever can find anything red in grass. And it's true. If you ever play frisbee golf with me and I throw a red frisbee, I'd be standing on top of it, no idea. Fail that test, consequences. If you fail to obey traffic laws, there's consequences for that too, and usually they're monetary consequences. And in Colorado, it's a little different than North Dakota, I found out, because in North Dakota, you pay $1 for every mile an hour over the speed limit you go, and you get a ticket. Colorado is a little more expensive. A little more expensive. Consequences. But there's a test that you are almost guaranteed to fail. I bet you've all failed this test in your life. And it's one of the oldest tests in the world, and it's only 10 questions long. And it's the 10 Commandments, right? 10 Commandments, this old list of things that you should do. And you look at that list and you wonder, can I do these things? 10 seems pretty reasonable. I can do 10 things, and you read the list and you realize these are uniquely difficult. And I think so. And unless you're a lot better person than me, which I wouldn't doubt, or you're just naive about your own shortcomings, my guess is at some point in your life you've been left wondering, I wonder what the consequences of failing this test so many times really is. Now, we don't treat all the 10 Commandments the exact same. Some of the 10 Commandments we take very seriously. Have you ever noticed that we take the commandments a little differently? Some of them we take really seriously, like thou shalt not murder and thou shalt not steal. We take that one so seriously we wrote it into our legal system, and if you break those commandments, you go to jail. Now, other commandments you don't go to jail for, and we take those a little less seriously, like maybe taking the Lord's name in vain. Right? We know we probably shouldn't do that, but we do it all the time. And this isn't just like saying OMG. Taking the Lord's name in vain is when we ascribe to God something that is not of God. I think the most famous example of taking the Lord's name in vain is by ever saying this sentence, God hates blank, right? God hates some group of people that we ourselves hate, and so it's really nice to say God hates them too. That's taking the Lord's name in vain, right? But we see it all the time, we do it all the time, we feel kind of bad about it. There's another one that we kind of feel bad about. That one is when the 10 Commandments say, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbors. And I don't know about you, but if you ever hung out with people and they like to gossip, yeah, I've hung out with a lot of you, and I know that we like to gossip. Gossip is like our favorite pastime. We feel barely guilty about that one. But then there are 10 commandments that we just ignore, right? That we just are not that interested at all. I think the biggest one in our society is thou shalt not covet. Our whole economy is based on coveting. Have you ever watched any commercial? The whole point of the commercial is to present this life that you could have if you just pay the low price of a brand new car. Oh, how happy and beautiful you will be. It's not just coveting, though. There's, I think, the one that we ignore the most in our lives and we feel the least guilty about is the commandment to remember the Sabbath. And I think it's gotten even harder now for those of you who are still in the workforce, right? Because our phones and our emails constantly remind us of the work that we have to do. And it's not just work in our lives, it's work in our personal lives, work in our homes. We forget the Sabbath all the time, and we don't feel that bad about it. So we've got this 10-question test that we fail on a daily, if not weekly basis, because we're often not living up to this ancient standard that God commanded on Mount Sinai. And so this morning, I'm not going to go into each of the 10 commandments like maybe you've heard done before. This morning, I'm just going to wonder about this question. What are the consequences of us constantly failing this test? And we'll start in chapter 19, which Tana started in, because this is the chapter before God gives the Ten Commandments. We'll see sort of what tone God is setting before giving us this list of things to do. And so Moses meets God on Mount Sinai, and the Bible says, Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob." And I noticed a couple things about that right off the bat that I want to share with you. First of all is this, that God is on a mountain, which is cool. I've been on a lot of mountains, and I've experienced God on mountains before. But more important than that, God is speaking on that mountain to Moses, which means God has this very personal relationship with Moses and the people of Israel, that God is still speaking to them. And the second thing I notice about that sentence that started us off this morning is when God says to the people and calls them the house of Jacob. Right? Because God still remembers the promises that God has made to this people's ancestors. Now for us, this is tricky, okay? For us, we were in Genesis just a couple of weeks ago. Okay? But in the actual story here, it has been hundreds of years since God first made promises to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Hundreds of years of living in bondage and slavery and hopelessness in Egypt. And after hundreds of years, God is still calling these people who may not even remember Jacob as their ancestor, still calling them the house of Jacob. God never, ever forgets a promise. These are God's people, and God does not abandon them no matter how bad it gets for them. So if you're about to give people a list of things to do that you kind of think they might fail at, this is a pretty nice way to start. To remind them of the promises that God has made and God's commitment to them. And then it goes into this really nice thing. God says, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." First, God reminds them of what God did to bring them out of Egypt. This thing that seemed so impossible, this situation that seemed so hopeless, God brought them out and brought them to God's self. And this is like one of our favorite verses in Scripture because we turned it into like a Lutheran favorite hymn. You all love it, and He will raise you up on eagle's wings. That one, you know that one? So God gives us this beautiful language of all the ways that God is committed to and promising and committed to God's people. And He does this just to kind of get us ready to hear our least favorite word in the English language. It's a word that Lutherans have been allergic to for 500 years. And that word is if. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my commandments. Ifs are conditional. If puts the onus on me to hold up my end of the bargain. If means something about my relationship with God is at stake here. And ifs are terrifying. If could mean that I could lose something important to me. And not only that, but if has been used as a weapon against God's people, by God's people, for ages. The world is full of people who were traumatized by churches that weaponized if for power and control. To keep people always wondering if God really loves them in order to make them behave according to a certain set of standards. So God says if, and we all get on our toes and we're all getting nervous. What is this going to be about? Listen to what's at stake. If you obey my voice and keep my commandments, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. If you obey my voice, if you keep my commandments, then you shall be my treasured possession of all the peoples. See, what's at stake here is Israel's special status. What's at stake here is the privilege of being the chosen people. And God says something here that we often miss, that sort of just flies by when we read this story. God reminds us that God is actually bigger than one group of people. God says, "Indeed, the whole earth is mine." Right? Being a chosen people doesn't mean being the only people. But God has chosen this group, these descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, to do God's blessing in the world. And here we see something new emerging in the story. What started out as a family, remember we were just working with Abraham and Isaac and their children and their wives and their households, now after hundreds of years is emerging into a nation. Jacob is becoming Israel, and it's going to be a different kind of nation that will keep God's voice holy in their lives and to seek to bless the world through them. And it's a really special relationship between this nation, Israel, and God. There are major benefits to being God's chosen people. God promises them time after time to rescue them and to prosper them. But there are also some major responsibilities, because being a holy nation means they will be scrutinized for every decision, for every policy, for every behavior. So there's this big if in the story this morning. There's something conditional. But I want you to notice what is not at stake in this story. God never mentions God's love, God's commitment, or even God's salvation. What is conditional is this special status of being God's chosen people, chosen to bless the nations of the earth. Now, Israel is going to fail those commandments that God gives them often, and as we read for the next couple of months, you're going to see just how many times God's people can fail and not live up to God's hopes and dreams for them. And they will lose their way, and they will go after other gods, and yet God will not give up on them. And yeah, when they do lose their way and when they do go after other gods, they compromise their own ability to be a blessing. And God might even use other nations to do God's work in the meantime, but God does not and will not abandon God's people. So all of that is in the background before we actually get to chapter 20 and the 10 Commandments. And God starts out with the same commitment God has been making time after time after time. Before any of the rules, before any of the tests, before any of the failures, the first thing God says at the beginning of the 10 Commandments is, "I am the Lord your God." I am the Lord your God is the first thing God speaks. And I think knowing that and reading that and understanding that changes the way we understand these 10 Commandments. Right? Some of you have had children or have been around children, and some of you have attempted to give children rules in your life. I'm learning how hard that is. 2.5, tough to give out rules these days. But think about how you give out rules, right? Like a very famous one, look both ways before crossing the street, right? You do not give out that rule conditionally based on your love, right? You don't say, look both ways before crossing the street or I won't love you. That would be terrible, terrible parenting. And if you did that, your kids are probably in therapy today. But it's because you are their parent. It's precisely because you love them. That's why you give them rules. It's precisely because you love them and want to protect them that you give them boundaries by which they can be safe and thrive. So the consequence has nothing to do with your love or lack thereof. The consequence is that the street is busy and dangerous. And the consequence could be that somebody gets hurt. See, that's what the 10 Commandments are. They're these gifts given out of love that God gave to us to keep us safe, to help us live the lives that God intended for us. And they are good, they're just pretty hard sometimes. But why shouldn't they be hard? To be God's special, chosen people who represent God, who do God's work with our hands in the world, why shouldn't we live up to a higher standard? And as Christians, Jesus was very clear that he did not come to abolish the law. Instead, if anything, he just made them harder. Right? In Matthew, Jesus says this about a few of the commandments. You've heard it said, in ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you're angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. So now it's not just murder, now it's anger. I mean, how hard is that to avoid? Jesus says, you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. Jesus is just elevating these commandments, raising the bar of expectations for us, and the standard by which God's people, you and me, live, by which God's people thrive, by which God's people are blessing to others, is so high that we just fail all the time. And yet, we never question God's love for us. On the cross, Jesus Christ assured us of the same thing God assured God's people at the beginning of the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God. On the cross, Jesus Christ committed to us in a way we could have never imagined possible, to show us just how unconditional that love is for us. And on the cross, Jesus alleviated, I hope for you, one of our biggest fears as human beings, that maybe, just maybe, we're not good enough for God's love. That maybe, just maybe, we're not cut out for salvation. But just as God rescued Israel on eagle's wings, God became one of us to show us that God's love never fails. Now, there are consequences to failing these 10 commandments. If you commit adultery, or if you never take a break from your work, or if you are constantly wishing you had someone else's life, I have a feeling that you're probably not being much of a blessing to others. And I have a feeling that you're probably pretty miserable. Those are the consequences. The natural consequences of breaking these commandments is living a life that is probably not living up to the kind of abundant life that God had intended for you. But you are still loved. And God has not given up on you. And in Jesus, God has freed you from all that binds you, and God will always give you another chance to be the blessing in this world that God created you to be. Amen.